Hey Sarah, how you doing? Thank you so much for submitting your first iteration of our trial by fire banana exercise. Um, Talking about the cap height, I noticed that. I'll talk about that as well. I'm going to find my ruler. As my hand is instructed. That's good. Good job doing the letters by hand. That's fantastic. Let's go ahead and take a look at the work, which I have up somewhere. Where is it? I'm sorry, that's not your work. Here it is, right here. Yep, there it is. Sarah, there you go, right there. All right, let's go ahead and okay, the first thing I notice is that, first of all, good job marking the baseline, the cap line, but this is not called X height. This X height is the height of the lowercase letters associated with any given typeface. However, the line that connects those lowercase letters is called the mean line. So there is a difference between an X height and a mean line. And I want you to really know that difference because that is going to come up in one of our upcoming quizzes. So again, X height is the height of lowercase letters. I'm sorry, X height is the height of lowercase letters. The mean line is the line that connects those. So technically, this is not an X height, this is a mean line. The baseline, I think, is drawn right there perfectly. The baseline is relevant here because it's perfectly level, and that's important. The cap line isn't perfectly level, so that's a problem. As we can see, it kind of goes uphill. Now, being that most of the letters in this word are lowercase, I think we're okay, but you definitely want to straighten that cap line out. So really the most important thing here is that the baseline, the mean line, and the cap line are all perfectly parallel. Now I know the instructions say you can't use a straight edge, but I'm okay if you need to use a straight edge to ensure that those lines are perfectly level and parallel. And to me, it's more important that you get a good, solid foundational start with um, uh, uh, level baseline, mean line, cap line than it is for you to try to get those as such without using a straight edge. So if you need to use a straight edge, I'm okay with that. Okay, craft is pretty good. I think your letters are really, really consistent, and that's impressive. So good job there. I'd like to see a little more contrast. In other words, the fill, the dark area letters, I'd like to see those a little darker, which means that you might consider either using a marker or a very soft leaded pencil to get the contrast needed here to really be able to see the individual characteristics of letter forms. Again, I just want to say it's remarkable the consistency that you've gotten here in your letter forms. A really, really good job here, Sarah. Um, Couple of things to pay attention to are the variable stroke widths here. And when I say variable stroke widths, I'm talking about just a little difference between this. See this lowercase a right here? See how thin it is right here? So again, compare that to the thickness right here. So there are some variations in the widths of the strokes associated with the general construction of this typeface. Really good job indicating the little curve on the tail of the A. Excellent. The bowls, the closed counters associated with the bowls of the uppercase B. The bowls are these areas, these curved areas, and the counters are the negative space inside. And those are not the same size. As we can see, this is smaller than this. And we want to definitely depict that. Yours is really close, but they look really close to being the same size. So you want to make sure that lowercase, that uppercase counter for the upper counter for the uppercase B is a little bit smaller than the lowercase counter. Okay, baseline, mean line, cap line. We have something called overshoot in typography. It looks like you've got it represented pretty well, but overshoot indicates that curved letter forms sit above the mean line a little bit and below the baseline a little bit. And when applicable, a curved letter form would sit above the cap height a little bit. When I say a little bit, I just mean a minuscule amount, as we can see right here. And the reason that we do that accounts for optical relationships, which are basically optical illusions. That if you were to take a square and a circle and place both on the same line with the exact same size, the circle is going to look a lot smaller. It's an optical illusion. In order to make them appear, the circle to be the same size as a square, you would make it a little bit bigger. And that's just basic elemental elements of art and design. So we take that same principle and apply it to typography by making the overshoot just a little bit on the curved areas of a letter form, meaning they overshoot over the mean or cap line or under the baseline. That's in our reading too as well, so you can review that. Okay, now this is default, this is current. The reason kerning, excuse me, the reason kerning and letter spacing is so important is it allows our mind to make logical groups. So as we can see here, without letter spacing, our mind can't really make a logical group here. If we're reading along and we come across this word in a paragraph and it's not spaced optimally, the mind will look at it. The mind will stop immediately in its tracks and go, the mind says, hey, wait, something's wrong here. This word, I'm not perceiving it as a word, but a series of letters. Therefore, the mind has to stop, slow down, and go banana, instead of just looking at it in a properly kerned or spaced version where the mind picks it up as one word, banana. And we take that theory and we move it towards the proper mechanics of sentences and paragraphs, so that if we read a sentence, our mind will perceive series of words instead of each individual word. So we don't necessarily look at each word. Okay, we look at groups of words. Our mind puts those together as long as they're spaced optimally. It's the same thing with letters. Our mind wants us to be able to look at a word and perceive that word as one word as opposed to a series of letters. And that's why letter spacing is so relevant to typography. General rule of thumb here is I think you've got a good letter spacing here. I would say this would be considered normal letter spacing, right? But what you want to do is I think we're really wide through all of these letter combinations. So what we want to do is this. Here's your rule. Keep this with you. This is really a great little rule for typography, specifically when letter spacing sans serif typefaces. The widest space, let me start with the narrowest space, okay? The narrowest space, now keep in mind, the ultimate goal is to make sure that all of the letter spaces appear to be equal. They're not, okay? This is a lot closer than this, okay? And there's a reason for that. It has to do with optical illusions and what we call optical relationships. But it doesn't look like this is wider than this. It looks completely natural, doesn't it? So the rule is this. In your letter forms, the closest space is going to be between two curved letter forms. Okay, so for example, the B and the A, both curved, that would be the closest space, followed by the space between a curved and a straight letter form, and then the widest would be between two straight letter forms. And the reason is because we want it to appear that the volume between all of these letter combinations is the same. Okay, so again, the closest would be two curves, then followed by a curve and a straight. The widest would be two straights. So go ahead and reassemble, reconfigure, rethink your spacing. Keep paying attention to craft. Great job there. Let's get those lines, baselines, mean line, cap lines, perfectly parallel and perfectly level. Let's change that from X height to mean line and darken up your contrast a little bit. Work on the spacing, as I mentioned in that little rule, and go ahead and resubmit. I think we've got everything we need for a successful submission for Sunday night's Part 2 Trial by Fire Banana. So if you have any questions at all, or if you need any clarification, please let me know. I'll be glad to provide as such. Other than that, great start, and I'm looking forward to seeing your final iteration. Thank you very much, Sarah.